Welcome to Talking Meds on the PrescQIPP podcast, engaging conversations about medicines-related dilemmas. I'm your host, Jonathan Underhill. Hello there, welcome to the latest episode of Talking Meds. I'm delighted to be joined today by Clare Howard, and we're going to talk about a new toolkit on repeat prescribing. It's just recently been published jointly from the Royal Pharmaceutical Society and the Royal College of General Practitioners. Clare led on the development of this and is well placed to answer my questions. I've known Clare for many years, starting when we worked together at the National Prescribing Centre. I led an education programme where we recruited stars from the world of medicines optimisation, gave them some training and some resources, and they ran local workshops on therapeutics and evidence-based medicine. And Clare was one of our very first trainers on that programme and helped shape it into what I still think is one of the best educational programmes there's ever been in the NHS. I get people coming up to me all the time yearning for it to come back, talking about it in glowing terms. And I guess you never know, it might come back. We're doing something on information mastery at PrescQIPP in the new year, some face-to-face workshops, so I mean, nostalgia ain't what it used to be, but it was a good program, I think, Clare, wasn't it? Clare's had an amazing career, beginning in community pharmacy, then as a prescribing advisor in Berkshire, and then she was the first deputy chief pharmacist for England, where she did some amazing work on medicines optimisation and the use of prescribing data. The Medicines Optimisation dashboard, that was your baby, Clare, wasn't it? She now has a portfolio which includes being clinical lead for Medicines Optimisation for Health Innovation Wessex, and leads the National Polypharmacy Programme, plus many other things. Quite frankly, she's one of the best people I've ever worked with, and I think she's the leading pharmacist of her generation. She doesn't take compliments well, so I can see her blushing at that already. Probably most importantly for both of our careers, there is another podcast called The Oral Apothecary, and Clare and I are known as the fourth and fifth apothecary. She's number 4 and I'm number 5. I'm told that very clearly by the boys at the Oral Apothecary. But yes, Clare, welcome. Lovely to talk to you. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And yes, I didn't quite live up to that introduction, but yeah, great to be here and looking forward to talking about the Repeat Prescribing Toolkit.
So before we get onto that, what else have you been up to recently?
So probably the bulk of the work that I do at the moment is the polypharmacy programme. So we run that locally in Wessex, but I'm also the national lead for that in the Health Innovation Network. And that's, it has all of the elements you've already talked about. It has data to prioritise which patients would benefit the most from a structured medication review. We do education and training, so the polypharmacy action learning sets, but we've just this morning run a masterclass looking at polypharmacy and health inequalities. And we also have developed a suite of materials to support patients. Patients don't always know what a structured medication review is, what it's for, what their opportunity is to talk about their medicines. So we've got a lot of work to do to help patients get the most of that opportunity. So that's a large component of the work that I do. But obviously, over the last year and a bit, I've been working with the Royal College of General Practitioners and the Royal Pharmaceutical Society to deliver the Repeat Prescribing Toolkit.
Okay, brilliant. I have to say, I've been involved with the actual learning sets component of the National Polypharmacy Programme, and it's really good, really practical based. Gives people the confidence that they need to safely deprescribe and have meaningful conversations with people about their medicines. Listeners will know that's one of my great passions in life. So I think it's a really great program. So in terms of this, the toolkit, then what was the background to that? I remember when I was at National Prescribing Centre, we did something on. I wasn't specifically involved with it. It was Richard Seal and others who were leading that. But I think it was saving time, helping patients. I think it was called. And we did a little tube map that people really loved, which looked at the mapping process of what goes on with repeat prescribing. I'm guessing because that was a while ago, things have changed, even though the evidence probably hasn't moved on too much. But we didn't have APS or anything back then, did we? So So what's the background to the toolkit being updated?
Well, I think anybody who works in the arena of, polypharmacy, overprescribing, the kind of increased medicines that we prescribe for very, very good reasons, but also when you start to see the impact that has on patients who are on multiple medicines with multiple long-term conditions, you realise very quickly that all roads lead back to repeat prescribing systems. And I've worked for a number of years. I was involved in the original repeat dispensing Pathfinder sites back in the early 2000s. I've worked on ERD locally in Wessex, and then in the pandemic, we stepped that up as a response to let's make sure people have got easy access to the medicines. But the National Overprescribing Review clearly highlighted this issue, and the fact I always describe repeat prescribing as it's a massive industry done on a kind of cottage industry basis. Every practice does things slightly differently, every pharmacy does things slightly differently, and yet we prescribe and dispense over 1 billion items every year. So recommendation 7 of the National Overprescribing Review was that the RCGP and the Royal Pharmaceutical Society produced jointly a toolkit. So it's very clear this wasn't guidance. This was a practical toolkit for general practice to improve the consistency of repeat prescribing systems. So that was the brief, and in 2023 NHS England commissioned us to start that work, and RPS and RCGP worked with a host of organisations and individuals and representatives to try and develop something really practical. Because like you say, if you're a new pharmacist working in general practice and you go in, like I did 25 plus years ago, and say, well, what a practice is supposed to do, because this doesn't feel quite right, there isn't any up-to-date guidance. The NPC work, great as it was, as you say, was developed before some of these developments. NHS app didn't exist, ERD didn't exist. So really it was to create something that off the shelf a practice could look at and say, this is what we should be aspiring to. We might not reach all of it overnight, but this is what good should look like. And that's what we've just hopefully published.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that. I mean, certainly from my perspective, it was certainly needed that something was needed just to improve the consistency of repeat prescribing systems and processes. It's like with all things, this is about the NHS is a complex organisation with lots of wicked problems that you can't fix, and this is probably one of them. You can't fix it. You can't make repeat prescribing, error-free forever. But what you can do is improve it a little bit by getting your systems and processes right. So, and as you say, lots and lots of medicines prescribed and dispensed, over 1 billion items, as Tim Harford was saying. Is that a big number? Yes, 1 billion is a big number. And medicines are associated with preventable harms as well, Claire, aren't they? So the repeat prescribing toolkit is aimed at reducing that sort of preventable harm as well, isn't it?
So I think there's a couple of things to just respond to that with. First of all, the vast majority of patients get access to their repeats month in, month out with relatively little problems and harm, actually. So I think to put it into perspective, most patients get what they need, and it's done by incredibly hardworking receptionists, doctors, pharmacists, community pharmacists, technicians, the whole team in community pharmacy and general practice, and indeed dispensing practices and others. But when you did, as I did as part of this work, when you look at what happens when it does go wrong, it's very clear that there are a number of key areas where we can get it badly wrong, and they tend to focus. So I reviewed all of the prevention of future deaths notices that are issued by coroners when a coroner reviews a death and looks at a system or process and says, actually, this could happen again if we don't get this right. And there were a large number of those that tended to centre around opioids, antidepressants, benzodiazepines, where patients were given access to those medicines on repeat, arguably without the right checks and balances in place. They weren't reviewed adequately, and then something would change in their situation and they'd had access to years worth of those medicines, and sadly that was a contributory factor to their death. And that, I sat for a whole day and a half reading those, and it was very sobering, and then prompted us to take a lens to the whole toolkit of medication safety. So all the way through it saying, look, we get this right. The vast majority of patients, but here's where it can go wrong. And as a practice, if you look at nothing else, look at these high risk medicines, high risk clinical scenarios and high risk patients, and see if we can improve it for those people and those scenarios. So it isn't, the practices don't have to do all of it overnight, but if they can look with a sort of critical eye, where could it go wrong for our patients, then hopefully they'll get something out of that piece of work.
So it's going to help people prioritise, if they are going to look at repeat prescribing, what areas do they need to look at? As you said, I think there's box 1, which shows all the different higher risk medicines, or the risks where medicines are associated with more risk of problems or preventable harm. Certainly you'd be using that as a way to prioritise which ones you are looking at, either as an individual prescriber or indeed as an organisation. So what are the main points of the toolkit then?
So the first thing, I think just on that point you just mentioned, nobody wakes up in the morning to be a poor prescriber, in my view. I've worked with hundreds of GPs, hundreds of pharmacists, hundreds of people in both of pharmacy and general practice, and nobody wakes up to get this wrong. It's a massive system and a massive undertaking. And so actually the solution to it is as a system. So this is a self-assessment tool. So the idea is that the practice look at the questions in the self-assessment. So they sit down as a group with the people who work on reception, maybe with some of their patients, certainly with their community pharmacy colleagues, but certainly with the GPs and pharmacists and practice managers. And the questions are split out, recognising how big this is and how busy and under strain general practice is. We chunk the work up into a number of areas. So it has 5 key elements. It has organisational culture, it has clinical responsibility, so who decides to make this medicine a repeat. It has technical areas, can we use technology to make sure we're recalling people for blood tests as well as possible. There's an administrative process, which receptionists do an incredible job of managing the way requests come in. And then obviously there's patients and carers who make the order and have to be part of the process to organise their repeats or go for blood tests. So it's split up into 5 elements, and then the self-assessment questions are set out as core questions and then advanced questions. So recognising that everybody can't do everything overnight, the core questions are, look, these are the basic building blocks you should have in place, and if not, what might you want to do about that? The advanced questions are for practices or PCNs even who want to take this further and say, well, we've done a lot of this work, how can we make sure we go from kind of good to great? So I hope what we've created is something that every practice can look at and say, well, we can't do all of this, but we could do this bit, or we're going to focus on this bit, so that there's some improvement there for every practice. Because I think arguably there are very few practices in the land who could put the hand up and say our repeat prescribing system is absolutely perfect and nothing can ever go wrong with it. I just don't think that's reality. So hopefully we've created something you can sort of bite off in bite-sized chunks, if you like, rather than it feel like an overwhelming piece of guidance that you're never going to achieve.
No, very much agree with that. I mean, the thing it probably highlights too as well is the organisational culture within the organisation you work in. If you've got a good organisational culture, I bet there's a strong correlation between having a reasonably good repeat prescribing system, whereas if you haven't, I bet it's more tricky. And of course that's another wicked problem. You can't solve culture overnight in your organisation. That takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. But this might be the thing that kicks it off and makes you think, well, actually, we're not doing as well as other people. And here's a process map that we can look at, and we can do a gap analysis of where perhaps we can improve a bit.
Yeah, I think I saw that right at the big. I mean, obviously, I've always worked in big, busy community pharmacies at the beginning of my career, and you see the differences between different practices. Well, this practice, we don't have as many queries, but this practice, every patient seems to have some sort of an issue. And then when I was a prescribing advisor, I worked with 11 practices in Newbury, and they were brilliant to me. They allowed me to go in and just assess what they did with repeats, look under the bonnet. I mean, I was so fortunate. Those GPs really were very, very good to me in letting me just look under the bonnet and recognising exactly what you said. The culture was different in every practice. That's not to say good or bad, but it was different. And the way that culture works, that those practices that are more open and honest to questions about why did that go wrong with Mrs. Smith? Let's have a look at why that happened. The practices that have got a bit of space and time to do that, but also an approach to do that, you can see then they learn from those things. Now, look, general practice is under an enormous amount of strain at the moment. So I think it's tricky to create the space to do this, but we worked very hard with the RCGP. We had lots of GP representatives on the process to make sure that at least there was something there that everybody could pick up on in some way. But I think the organisational culture sets the tone, and I think you'll see the good practices will grab hold of this straight away. I think what is important for the pharmacists, though, is that there's a real leadership role here that pharmacists in general practice could play by saying, look, I can't fix all of this for the practice, but I can lead the process and get you all in a room and we can talk about this. And again, in PCNs, I'm seeing some great clinical pharmacists who've done that process already. And I hope this gives some of the other pharmacists the tools to be able to go into the practice and do that process. But it's a bit like the work we did on Pincer. The pharmacists can't do all of it. They can lead it, but they need to be supported by practice manager, prescribing lead, reception team. It's a team response that's needed if you're going to get this fully embedded.
No, again, I completely agree with that. I mean, I was part of the oversight group, the working group for this as well. The thing that I was struck with, and I have been the last 10 years of my career, was just what a meaningful contribution there was from the lay members of that group, the patient. They transformed the whole thing, didn't they, Claire? And again, the one thing that I really love, well, not the one thing, but the thing that I love most about the Repeat Prescribing Toolkit is section 5.4, where you say, questions for the general practice patient participation group. So basically, you ask your patients, what do you think of the repeat prescribing system here? So the first question is, do you think the practice repeat prescribing process is clear and understood by most patients registered with the practice? Yes or no. 2, would you describe the process as timely, safe and effective? And 3, are there any parts of the repeat prescribing process that patients think could be improved? You ask those 3 questions, and boy, what's that will give you massively informed insight into just how well your repeat prescribing system is working. And I'd definitely start there, I think, if I was doing this.
Yeah, I think it was brought home to me just by, obviously I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years going back and forth to home and seeing my mum and dad and realizing that their friends, when they ask questions, they say, well, how do you get a repeat? The doctor said it can be repeated, but how do I get a repeat? And you realize language that we all use, repeat prescription.
Yep.
The public might not know what a repeat prescription is, and they might not know the mechanism to get it. So if we've not explained that to them, we do all the evidence around adherence and all the rest, but we forget. Patients don't know necessarily what a repeat is, how to access it. They don't know what a structured medication review is and how to access it. And yet we don't spend the time to explain that. So I think using that as a litmus test to say, well, do your patients know that, might tell you an awful lot about the setup you've got locally.
Completely agree. We explored doing some work, the impact tool that we do at PrescQIPP, which is aimed at healthcare professionals to prepare people for medication reviews on the healthcare professional side of things. We thought, wouldn't it be a good idea to do one patient-facing version of that? Held a couple of focus groups, and what came across loud and clear was that they didn't know what a structured medication review was. They weren't aware that they were even a thing. People were saying, well, I've never had one, or if I had, I didn't know I was having one. So I think there's lots and lots of work for us to do on just the communications of this and exactly what it is we're doing and how we take that forward. And again, that comes across loud and clear in the toolkit as well. So I think that's really helpful. Just in terms of, again, this is maybe not a straightforward question, but what would you say the easy wins were in here for people? And what do you think would be more difficult for people to do something about?
So I think that's hugely dependent on the type of practice you're in and how much pressure the practice is in. But I think every practice could at least have an hour's get together to just say, look, this has come along. We might not be able to sit down and answer all these questions, but broadly, what do we as a team think? And make sure you include, the people who work on reception and the prescribing lead and the practice managers, maybe, just a small number of you in a room going, where do we think we might come out on this? Because it is so busy, it's sometimes really hard to even get your brain off the hamster wheel to go, oh God, I know there's something about our repeat, but I've not been able to think about it. But getting 4 or 5 people together from the practice to go, well, how do you think we would do this? And how do you think we'd come out if we looked at this? I think will give practices at least the understanding. And then someone in the practice needs to take some responsibility to say, okay, over the next 12 months, and it could take that, we're going to bite off these 4 chunks. And I think it's about each practice just working out what's realistic for them. But that first kick-off meeting, just getting a few of you together for a half an hour over, at some point in the day. And I know that's hard, but say, do we think our repeat prescribing system is where it needs to be? And if not, should one of us have a look at this toolkit and see if there's something we need to do? And I think, again, back to the pharmacist, there's a big role to take some leadership around this and say, actually, I'll help drive this forward, but I just need to make sure the whole team is supporting me to chip away at this. I think that's, for me, feels like an easy win. We're not asking for it all to be fixed tomorrow, but a realistic assessment is a sensible way forward.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what we were saying before about this being a wicked problem. You can't fix it, but for any complexity, and complexity theory tells you, have a look and see where you are at the minute, break it down into bite-sized chunks, and try and get some early, easy wins on that. And also, importantly, make it someone's job to do this and make sure you follow it up. Otherwise, it just gets forgotten about and you don't see any progress. So, no, completely agree. Completely agree.
There's big things going on, medicine shortages. There's things that are not in the gift of any of us to fix. Yeah. But that doesn't mean the whole thing hasn't got any parts of it that can be fixed. And I think if people take a bit of a hard look inside about what's going on in your individual practice, there will be things that that could be smoothed out. And the thing that the toolkit gets, to try and be a bit more positive, the thing the toolkit tries to get across is we've spoken to practices who have done the self-assessment type role or have done, really mapped their processes. And when they've done that, although it's a bit laborious, they've produced not only an improved system in terms of safety, but an improved system in terms of efficiency. And so, practices, there is a kind of reward at the end of this, but I'm not underestimating the kind of work that has to go to get to that point. But we have definitely got examples of practices that have produced those efficiencies.
Yeah, again, I think the examples in the toolkit were really, really helpful as well. I think the other thing that people often come up with here and was discussed at the oversight group was, oh, if only there was a digital solution to this, then everything would be fixed. But it wouldn't, because first of all, I'm not sure that's going to be achievable in my lifetime. We've been waiting for a digital solution to the NHS for years, haven't we? But if you don't fix if you don't try and address some of the underlying issues that caused this in the first place, no matter how good your digital solution is, it's still going to perpetuate some of the other things that are not working well in the first place. So, yeah, and the whole thing
is the best example of that. So I've seen practices make a brilliant job of electronic repeat dispensing, and that's because they really thought about the processes behind it first. I've seen other places try and put ERD in on top of what is a bit of a system that needs a look at, and it doesn't work. And of course, people then say, oh, ERD doesn't work. ERD works in parts of the country exceptionally well, but it's not universal because you can't plonk a digital system in on a system that needed looking at, for sure.
Exactly, I couldn't agree more. So just to finish off then, what 3 things would you say to practice-based colleagues that they should be doing here?
Have a look at it, go through it, have a look at it. There's 2 versions. There's a PDF version, which is everything is in there. So that's a bit of a long read, but there is a web-based version on the RPS website. It's freely accessible to anybody, even if you're not a member, and you can look at sections of it. And if you're only going to look at one section, go and have a look at the medication safety section. So have a look at it, have a think about how you might do the self-assessment in your practice, and then go and speak to one of the GPs in the practice or the practice manager and say, look, should we have a look at this? How about I sort of pick this up and we work as a group to just do our self-assessment. And I think, if you do those 3 things in the next 12 months, you'll have gone a long way to addressing this.
That's great. We'll put a link to the website in the show notes as well. And not to forget about hospital colleagues. But so what would you say hospital colleagues can do here in this space?
So I spend a lot of my time looking at the issues around discharge medicines. We obviously have the discharge medicine service that we worked on from the Health Innovation Network a few years ago. I think for hospital colleagues, and again, they're under pressure, it's busy, but remembering that short time that the patient spends with you is nothing compared to what they've then got to do and go home and access their medicines. And the way we discharge patients on the medicines, the information you give to the GP or the practice about this is intended for short-term use, this has been changed because this should be repeated, please can you do, you know, X follow-up. That information, the more information that you give to general practice and primary care, the better able they are when the patient comes home to get it right for them. You know, I get sent lots of information about, you know, poor discharge notices where you're asking people to hazard a guess as to what the original prescriber's intention was. Let's try and take some of that out of it, and let's be clear about what the intention is sort of going forward for that patient, not just to get them out of the hospital doors.
Brilliant. I think that sort of those clear communication channels with clear, timely communication from hospital would be really helpful here. Claire, that's been brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're really busy, but I think that's been a really, really helpful insight into what I think is a really, really useful toolkit that can really help with medicines optimization for patients. So thanks for listening, guys. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with the third episode of Sensible Prescribing in Older People with Jonathan and Lucy, with Lucy Pollock. And we'll meet Marjorie, an older lady with preserved ejection fraction heart failure, who's recently been started on dapagliflozin and is admitted to hospital with, guess what, a UTI. Well, and then in 4 weeks' time, I chat to Hayley Berry, who's a pharmacist who was involved in the guideline development group for the NICE menopause guideline. So we'll hear an update on the NICE menopause guideline. Thanks, guys. We'll see you soon. Cheers.